Good morning, everyone. We're going to give it one more minute for people to join. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Lauren, and welcome to our Indiana Rapid DNA webinar hosted by GTH DNA and our Rapid DNA learning platform, Go Rapid DNA. And we are excited about our webinar program today. And we have 7 distinguished speakers that will be covering the advancements of rapid DNA in the United States and specifically here in Indiana. The format for today's webinar is that we will hear from our 7 speakers whose presentations last approximately 10 minutes each. We will then have about 15 minutes to address questions from the audience before the webinar ends at 11:30. And you can submit a question at any time during the webinar, and we will do our best to address your questions. And if we don't have time to address your questions during the webinar, we will work with the speakers panel to follow up with your questions later this week. And to submit a question, please post it in the chat box, which is directly up above in the bar. And for those of you that are authorized to receive continuing education credits for today's event, GTH DNA will be offering attendance certificates, and I will post a link to the questionnaire where you will have the option to enter your contact information to receive a certificate, along with an option to let us know if you would like to receive further information on rapid DNA and funding options. I hope you enjoyed today's event. We will now hear from Chief Ed Gebhardt. Ed Gebhardt is the chief of the Fishers, Indiana Police Department. Chief Gebhardt has been in law enforcement since 1994, and he started with the Fishers Police Department in 2000. In addition to working as a patrol officer, field training officer, SWAT member, and background and public information officer, he also served as a sergeant and was appointed to chief in 2018. Over to you, Chief.
Took some work in between the sergeant and the chief. There's some other steps in there, but good morning, everyone. I'm Chief Ed Gebhardt with the Fishers PD. I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar focusing on the future of rapid DNA in the state of Indiana. I'd like to welcome our speakers and the many attendees that are here taking the time to participate in today's event. For over 3 decades, DNA has allowed crimes to partner For over 3 decades, DNA has allowed crime labs to partner with law enforcement to solve crimes that would not have been solved without the DNA use. DNA has transformed how we identify criminals and exonerate the innocent. I believe I speak for all law enforcement when I say we are grateful to the Indiana State Police Crime Lab for leading us through the complexities of DNA for so many years. Here at Fishers, we are particularly grateful for the State Crime Lab's assistance in helping us navigate and build our rapid DNA program that we started back in 2021. Later in today's program, you will hear more about the Fishers Rapid program from Lieutenant Jim Hawkins. Rapid DNA is positioned to change law enforcement's relationship with DNA. The idea of getting immediate answers with DNA rather than waiting weeks or months will have a huge impact on how we investigate and fight crime. Suspects could be developed in one day. Suspects could be developed on the day of the crime due to rapid DNA's use in some of the most complex cases. We know that to maximize the power of rapid DNA, we need to access to the offender CODIS database. As you will hear from the FBI later in today's program, they are positioning to allow evidence tested on rapid DNA to be compared to CODIS within the next year. This is exciting news. Please enjoy today's webinar. Fishers would like to extend an invitation to those interested in an open house here at our police department on 10/1 at about 2:30 p.m. You will hear from our team and see firsthand how we utilized and grew our rapid DNA program among other cutting edge technology that we use to help fight crime and could help yours as well. Please let us know at Fishers PD by emailing my assistant, Anna Hook, hook@fishers.gov.in. if you're interested in that open house. And again, this invite is to executives or crime lab executives. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you, Chief. Our first presenter is Lisa Hurst. Lisa is the Director of North America for GTH DNA, where she has worked for over 25 years on forensic DNA public policy and legislation. Lisa will give us an overview of rapid DNA, a legal review, and federal funding opportunities related specifically to Indiana. Over to you, Lisa.
Thank you, Lauren. Again, as Lauren stated, I'm just trying to maybe start off here with making sure everyone understands what RAPID is, some of the limitations, but also some of the overarching best uses for rapid DNA, so that the rest of your presenters today don't have to go into the background. So what is rapid DNA? Rapid DNA processes samples in 90 minutes. Think about that, 90 minutes. This actually goes not, it can be at the crime lab for certain, but the end user identified and who was for whom Rapid was built originally, the end user is your minimally trained in terms of scientific analysis, minimally trained law enforcement officer. It does use the same scientific methods as used in the crime labs, but it can be done at your precinct. It's a desktop sized, kind of microwave sized instrument that can just go on a table. It's self-contained, and it takes a minimal amount of training to operate. Again, importantly, you can start to change the dynamic of how investigations, especially those investigations, obviously, with potential biological evidence, how those investigations are handled. Instead of waiting weeks, frankly, many times months, for evidence to be sent and then processed at your state crime lab or local crime lab, Rapid DNA can give you a result in 90 minutes. You are looking at potentially making identifications or, importantly, exonerations within hours. So before going into some of those use case scenarios, a few knots of rapid DNA. Rapid DNA is not intended as a replacement for traditional lab-based DNA analysis. One of those reasons is that RAPID is not advised right now for complex casework. So things like mixtures, if you have more than one perpetrator, or if the perpetrator is potentially mixed with the victim's DNA. So your rape kits right now, not a great use for RAPID. Degraded samples, really old samples, and really low copy DNA, things like touch DNA, not a great use for RAPID. That doesn't mean things like cigarette butts, things like that do work with RAPID in certain situations, but not your just barely touched a doorknob in most cases. Rapid DNA, we get this question quite a bit. Rapid DNA has not actually been challenged in court for admissibility. So those Fry-Daubert hearings, we haven't had those for Rapid. That's not to say that Rapid has not been used in court. Rapid has been used in court. It's just that at this time, the defense bar has not challenged it yet. We suspect that'll come eventually, but right now I think one of the reasons that we haven't seen an admissibility challenge is that agencies using rapid DNA on crime scene investigations are following what some of the scientific working groups have recommended, meaning that they use an A swab and B swab method. So you have one crime scene, you take two swabs from that crime scene. The A swab, the best swab, would always go to the crime lab, and the B swab, that can go right into your rapid DNA instrument for a presumptive lead. The other one, again, goes to the crime lab if you have a need for presenting that data in court. The lab would also be able to test that original sample. So that's why we haven't seen admissibility hearings yet. We assume we will eventually. But we do also recommend that the best use of rapid DNA are programs where you have an accredited crime lab working with you. In a lot of instances, your local or state crime laboratory will consider partnering with you and providing some of that scientific, what we call support, scientific reach back. But also know that there are some very good accredited private laboratories that would also be more than willing to work with you. Of course, those accredited crime laboratories will have a fee associated with their support. So a few of the use case scenarios. The first one I want to talk to you about is arrestee identification. So we do have a number of states. Indiana is one of them, where law enforcement is actually required to collect a DNA sample upon arrest for certain crimes. Indiana is one of our states that is allowed to collect for all felony arrests. And the great thing about this booking station environment, this is a program the FBI has set up and has created the standards for. It's already in use in a few states. And you get to collect that DNA sample. And again, instead of sending it off to the crime lab, waiting weeks, maybe months before the sample is processed. Of course, by that time, that guy typically, in many instances, is no longer in custody. He's been released. He's back out, or she is back out in the community. Rapid DNA, 90 minutes later, you have checked CODIS, or you have checked a disk of special index of special concerns, and then usually within 24 hours, the entire CODIS system is checked. It prevents offenders from being released before you've made that match. It closes some collections on loopholes because the whole system is just integrated better with the fingerprint collection, and it avoids dangerous situations because that guy knows what he's done. And now he's been released. And when you have to come back and serve a warrant for his arrest for this other incident, this other crime, it could lead to a dangerous situation. So Louisiana was the first state to begin implementing rapid DNA booking stations. Florida is in the process of rolling out 8 to 10 sites right now. And we have several states in development, actively in development, but at different stages. Alabama, Arkansas, Arizona, Ohio, and the FBI are all looking at or in the process of developing systems that will allow them to participate in this system. However, you do have to have, there's a few requirements that are big issues. The first one is booking station implementation and having the right enrollment. So unfortunately in Indiana, the law requires that the person who was arrested and has a DNA sample collected, that they cannot send that sample for testing unless there was a felony arrest warrant or until there has been a probable cause finding. So you do collect the sample at booking, but you're not allowed to test it until this next hurdle of arrest warrant or probable cause has been met. That's a problem. That's a problem for the way that the FBI needed to set up the system to have appropriate checks and balances in place to make sure we have the right samples coming into the database. Until and unless Indiana's legislature changes this statute, you cannot have a booking system enrollment process for rapid at your booking stations. The other thing you might want to look at in Indiana, as long as you're already opening the statute to make some changes, you want to make sure that your local law enforcement agencies that use rapid can actually process the sample at the booking station. There's a lot of language in the Indiana code that talks about sample has to be collected and shipped. Collected and shipped. It's being shipped to Indiana State Police where they do the processing. So there probably ought to be some additional language in here that allows for, shipped, or an agency participating in the rapid booking station program would have authority to process it locally. And then authority to operate. Even once you have all of those statutes in place, there's a lot of IT work that the crime lab and your state police bureaus would have to go through to get the right IT infrastructure in place. And then there's also a smaller but still important live print, live scan integration that has to happen at the local level as well in order to get this authority to operate. So the problem that we see with this piece is just that it can be a funding and resource limitation in terms of having the IT people all at the table and working on this as a priority. So there's, I'm sorry, that says for SC implementation. That should say for IN implementation, Indiana implementation. So this program has worked. I won't go through each of these, but in Baton Rouge, that was the East Baton Rouge, that was the first test site for rapid DNA at a booking station in the United States. They had some great hits, including hits to other states, attempted murder of a police officer, homicide, rape, burglary. So it is working. Some great examples out of Louisiana. If anyone's interested, the East Baton Rouge Sheriff's Office has really been a leader on this issue, and they've been very helpful to other local jurisdictions looking into that. If you'd like to reach out to them. So then moving into, that's the arrestee booking station situation. What's more available for a lot of jurisdictions is this evidence application. So the most common and easiest one, if you don't have databases and don't want to get into that, is just a one-to-one comparison, right? So you have evidence from a crime scene and you've got a suspect in custody or a suspect that you've been able to get a DNA sample from, and you can just use those rapid instruments to compare crime scene to specific individual. The one-to-one match, again, you're moving DNA to the front end of investigations. Right now, DNA in a lot of instances is at the back end. The case has either gone cold or you already have done a lot of detective work to identify a suspect. And this is really, DNA can be about helping the prosecution get a conviction and not necessarily leading your investigations. But DNA at the front end, 90 minutes, you're leading investigations now with this scientific analysis. And importantly, you're not just necessarily identifying an individual, but you're also potentially exonerating an individual, identifying where you had a bad lead. And this can reduce allegations of bias and other community confrontations where you're having to interview a whole bunch of people while you're waiting for this DNA evidence to return. Another option, local DNA databases. So this matching typically is 1 to hundreds, maybe thousands as the database grows. A lot of times we see this in jurisdictions where there's not an arrestee DNA database in the state. You'll see this coming up with Sheriff Herron, who used to be the chief of Ben Salem. Now he's a sheriff of Bucks County. But that's where one of our biggest DNA programs, local programs, was started. So you can do crime scenes, you can do suspects, and you can do other volunteers who, as maybe suspects in other investigations, just agree to give a DNA sample. State DNA databases. So this is not CODIS still, but as we just discussed, in Indiana, everyone who is convicted or arrested of felonies is required to provide a DNA sample to their database. Some states have made that index available to local law enforcement for searches. This has been going on in Arizona, Connecticut, to a lesser degree, Kentucky, and certainly Missouri has about 9 to 11 instruments rolling out right now around their state to do this. A few other states also have programs actively being prepared and should be launching live pretty soon. So again, this is just a search of the state database, but frankly, about 90% of all matches in CODIS are made at the state level. Again, the A swab, B swab, your A swab still goes to the crime lab. The crime lab, once it gets the A swab, can still put that sample into the national DNA database, but your immediate rapid search can, in these states and with the state crime lab support and approval, can search just the state offenders to get you a quick lead. And of course, the big gorilla is CODIS. CODIS has over 23 million profiles in it. Right now, evidence processed on Rapid cannot be searched nationally, but as you've already heard, change is coming. You'll hear more about that from our FBI speaker today. It's coming soon, later in 2025. Looks like everything is on track. And what I would really suggest as a takeaway is consider working groups. And really, this is regardless of whether you're looking at an arrestee or just a state sharing or this bigger CODIS access, you're really going to need working groups with, importantly, with your crime lab, with law enforcement. I would add prosecutors and I would add legislators, because at the end of the day, none of this is free. And your state legislators are going to need to be, you're going to want them involved in discussions around policy, but also around funding and resources and how to make this work. And lastly, just a quick note on earmarks. Earmarks, there's now all of these dots. This does not represent where Rapid exists. Rapid exists in a much bigger number of jurisdictions. This is just where agencies have sought federal money for Rapid DNA out of the earmark process and have to date been successful. We're seeing about an 80% success rate. Legislators have really been supportive. This is at the congressional level at U.S. Congress. They've really been supportive, have really liked Rapid. The 2025 cycle has already started, but we will start beginning to help and talk with agencies around the country about the 2026 cycle later this fall. So if you're interested, please let us know through my information or through Lauren with the Go Rapid. But it's a great way to get some money for just these important sort of startup costs for Rapid DNA. This is my contact information. I'd be happy to answer any questions anytime. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Our next presenter is Monica Roxwald. Monica is filling in for Robert O'Brien. Robert works at the Global Forensic Justice Center at the Florida International University. And Monica is a forensic biologist who is also from the Global Forensic and Justice Center, a part of Florida International University. And Monica has been working in forensics for 18 years and will be providing a technical overview on rapid DNA systems. Thanks for joining us, Monica. Over to you.
Hello and good morning, everyone. As stated, my name is Monica Roxold and I am with GFJC in Largo, Florida. We as a company have been involved in rapid DNA testing more or less since the beginning, working with some of the earlier versions of the instruments available. Today, we still do train for rapid DNA, supporting both law enforcement as well as the military. So rapid DNA can process a collected sample in approximately 90 minutes. So the conventional DNA workflow is compressed into an easy-to-use mobile process. The small size of these instruments allow them to be easily portable and set up in any type of laboratory environment. They are designed to be operated by non-technical users, removing the scientists and giving the law enforcement, military, and crime scene personnel control of the analysis themselves. The instruments have minimal hands-on time, meaning once it has started running, you can walk away and do other tasks. It's an easy three-step system. First, the sample is placed into a cartridge, and that cartridge is inserted into an instrument. The instrument processes the samples, and then you obtain the DNA results. Now, these results are confirmatory, meaning the quality of the results you're getting are the same as the ones produced in a laboratory. All the chemistry is the same, and even the kits that we're using are similar. All matches and investigative leads are on the same level provided by these forensics labs. So here's an example of two of the systems that are currently on the market. On the left is the Rapid Hit ID, and on the right is the Andy system. So both the systems can analyze reference samples and casework evidence samples using one of two available cartridges. Both systems have reference cartridges. Typically, used with buccal swabs, but they may also be used for collected blood swabs or other standards taken directly from an individual. And both systems have a casework cartridge designed for crime scene samples that are expected to have lower levels of DNA. And these samples include blood, bone, tissue from a mass disaster situation, saliva, hair, and or samples collected from clothing. The way the instrument operates is rather simple. Once a sample is collected, it's placed into a cartridge. So this process itself takes less than 5 minutes. The cartridge is then inserted into the instrument and left to run for approximately the 90 minutes. The instrument can obtain a full DNA profile, and as mentioned previously, it can be matched to samples in a database. Currently, this includes your local database, and potentially, like mentioned, starting in 2025, it can be matched to samples in CODIS. Once again, matches made with this data are definitive matches. If a user is not familiar with DNA processing or what a DNA profile looks like, the system provides quality flags. So the green flags indicate a full DNA profile, and there's no need for an additional review of the data. Green flag samples are going to be acceptable, 100% matches. In other words, they're great data. Yellow flags indicate the profile does need to be reviewed. These will need to be looked at by someone with expertise in DNA analysis. So an expert can determine if there is enough data for the sample to be uploaded, or if the sample is too low level or too complicated for use. So the yellow sample ranges for almost complete profiles, which just say one area with a missing allele, all the way down to just a few called peaks. And it is also flagged yellow when a sample happens to be a mixture or cannot be, or is too complex to be added into any of the databases. A red flag usually indicates that there's an issue with the instrument or the cartridge reagents. So with a red flag, someone needs to determine if the issue is associated with the instrument error or if it's likely just the cartridge reagent. So errors might need to be addressed further by technical support from the company, where cartridges could just be a sample can be run again. So with green check marks, the rapid software can confirm matches between a suspect and a casework DNA profile. So typically in booking stations, the system needs to produce a green check mark to be searched against any databases. Yellow check marks means you need to have some sort of technical reachback with a trained DNA analyst, and this can be through a private laboratory or a partnership with your local forensic laboratory. They can review the DNA profiles and let you know if the sample is good enough or not to be used in matching. And now there is a potential for the laboratory to actually reanalyze the data itself from a rapid hit using their own instruments and importing the data, the lab analysis software, so they could use their own protocols and methods in analysis. So it is important to have a rapid DNA sample guide. So prior to use, agencies will need to validate the types of samples that they plan to run on the instrument. Normally, you would target high-level samples such as body fluids like blood and saliva. We here have successfully gotten DNA profiles off of cigarette butts, drinking containers, chewing gum, and even a single strand of plucked hair. So through the validations, you can verify if the instrument is good for these samples and determine what types of samples will not work very well. So you can learn which samples are more likely to produce mixtures or which ones are very low level degraded DNA. And those samples should be left for conventional DNA analysis. So evidence collection can include the swab A and swab B method, where swab A, the first one swabbed, can be reserved for the lab. And if there's a match, then they can testify on the results. Then swab B will be run on the rapid instrument in hopes of getting an investigative lead, and that can be used relatively immediately in comparison. There's also a bouquet swab method, in where a stain is swabbed with two swabs held together at the same time, and one of these swabs will be sent to the lab while one can be run on the instrument itself. If you are purchasing a rapid DNA system, ask the company to provide some kind of field guide for sample processing. Not every piece of evidence will be a swab. So pictured here is a cigarette butt that will require a few additional steps for processing. The same applies to a piece of gum and pieces of cloth, but overall sample field guides should provide clarification on a variety of samples that can be analyzed using this instrument. So this concludes my presentation. Thank you for your time and attention, and I will be handing the mic back over to Lauren.
Thank you, Monica. Our next presenter is Sheriff Fred Herron. Sheriff Herron is currently the sheriff of Bucks County, Pennsylvania. And before being elected sheriff, he was an earlier pioneer of using rapid DNA when he was the police chief of Bensalem Township. And Sheriff Herron will discuss his rapid DNA program and how it has benefited his community by expediting criminal investigations. Over to you, Sheriff. Lieutenant Hawkins is responsible for organizing, training, and implementing new technology into the Forensic Services Unit. Over to you, Lieutenant.
Thank you, Lauren. Appreciate it. Um, Hi, my name is Lieutenant Jim Hawkins with the Fishers PD. I'm here to talk to you about a local perspective of how you can jump right in on rapid DNA and some of the successes we've had and some of the ways we're implementing it at a local level, sort of from the ground up. So obviously we started with the initial hardware and software. We looked at the time we were the only ones who were in the state who were implementing rapid DNA. So we really had to look at how, as a local law enforcement agency, we could work with our partners and work with our resources in order to make this program successful. And we really looked at it, from a law enforcement perspective that rapid DNA is fantastic. It is going to allow us to generate leads. It's going to allow us to enhance our solvability matrix for our casework. But it can be scary and it can be complicated at first and on face value. But realistically, we started off by utilizing our rapid DNA program, not unlike a really expensive portable breath test. It's a concept that everybody in law enforcement can understand. We use the PBTs on operating while intoxicated investigations. They're a great tool, and they generate probable cause, the immediate probable cause that we can use to make the arrest. We can put somebody in cuffs, but we know we're still going to have to get a certified breath test, or we're going to have to get a certified blood draw. But we get that probable cause that gets us that information quickly, right then and there on the spot. Rapid DNA is a lot like that. We are going to utilize the rapid DNA in order to generate probable cause to allow us to get confirmatory DNA with our partners at the Indiana State Police Lab. We talked, or the presenters talked earlier about the red, yellow, and green check marks that you can get from these rapid DNA instruments. And there are solutions out there, whether it's in-house DNA analysts that you can have and do those interpretations for you. You can utilize resources from private labs in order to get those same results. One thing that we did was try to think outside the box a little bit, and we partnered with the University of Indianapolis. Dr. Krista Latham is a biologist and board-certified forensic anthropologist, and her team of graduate students are able to remote in to our computer system here from their lab. They're able to take those yellow check marks, those yellow X's that we get, and do a interpretation of those DNA samples. We validated the process they use with the Indiana State Police Lab to make sure that everybody was working at the same prescribed manner for these interpretations. But it enabled us to find more cost-effective ways of getting that DNA reach back and interpretation, and it became very successful. It developed a great community partnership with the university and the local students, and it has been a fantastic partnership for the Fishers Police Department. So we got the rapid DNA, we got things up and running. We had to, decide how we were really going to take action with this. Being that we were sort of solo at the very beginning of this, we elected to get a smaller sample database, but those databases can expand, and they can expand up into the millions depending on what package you go with. But the nice thing about this is for other agencies within the state of Indiana is we worked with the Indiana State Police Lab to develop an MOU to try and avoid having 50 different agencies with 50 different databases. Other agencies who hopefully will buy into the Rapid DNA program for themselves will be able to jump into our database and will be able to work with the Fishers Police Department and every other agency that gets involved, and we'll have access to every unknown DNA database within the Indiana State Police's DNA database. So then we move into trying to attack specific problems, whether it's crime guns, whether it's narcotics. We all know narcotics cases. A lot of, how many homicides end up being a homicide, but started as a drug deal that went bad. We really started looking at that, developing those, targeting those criminals at a lower level and trying to get their DNA into our database. While they were doing some of these lower level crimes rather than just waiting for the big ones. We also looked at when starting this, they talked about databases earlier. It can be a little disconcerting. Where do we start? We don't have millions of DNA profiles, but regardless of whether or not you're a large agency or small agency, you do have you do have a database whether you realize it or not. You have a property room that is full of known and unknown DNA samples that you're able to start going back through and putting into your Rapid DNA. We'll talk about some of these cases down the line, but the Fishers PD was able to close a couple cold case burglaries just with what we had sitting on a shelf in our property room, gathering dust in a package. So what we really tried to set up, it really is fairly simple. This is not overly complex. We are focusing on consent and warrant samples and crime scene samples, getting those samples into our Rapid DNA, matching those results, and then getting that information quickly out to our partners in central Indiana and hopefully expanding from there. The consent, it seems silly. I didn't think it was going to be as successful as it was, but consent samples are very, very easy to get. As it turns out, about 80% of the suspects we encounter that the patrol officers request a DNA sample from, they will give it to them. So what we really focus with our patrol officers is how many times do you go out on a traffic stop and ask for consent to search a vehicle? If you're asking for consent to search a vehicle, you really should be asking for consent to get those DNA, and that's helping to increase our sample size. Just a couple quick case studies that worked for us. We had a car full of high school students coming back, Ubering back from a school event. Another driver smashed into him. Luckily, everybody survived, but it was a very serious bodily injury crash. The driver of the orange car a person was in the passenger seat of the orange car, said, "I wasn't the driver. I don't know who was driving the car." The officers obviously didn't quite believe that story. He'd been drinking. So we sent a crime scene investigator out to the scene. She took a sample of blood from the passenger side airbag. That sample of blood was brought back, analyzed, developed a profile. We got a search warrant for a buccal swab from the suspect. And that night, while he was still in the hospital, while everybody was still in the hospital, we were able to have probable cause that he was sitting in that driver's seat at the time of the crash. We talked about those databases you have sitting back in your property room right now, just gathering dust. This was a Rapid DNA case where this occurred before Fishers PD had Rapid DNA. It was a residential burglary. Suspect went into a open garage door, took car keys from a kitchen counter, stole the car. Our officers get into a pursuit. He's apprehended. We process the car. We make a 1-by-1 comparison match because we all know we don't put known samples into CODIS. So we made a 1-by-1, or by we, I mean the Indiana State Police Lab made a 1-by-1 conventional DNA match. Our suspect was arrested. Everything goes according to plan. Later on, as we're going back through that stockpile of DNA we have sitting back in the property room, we run his sample. It was never entered into CODIS, and that sample hit on 2 open cases, one out of Carmel Police Department, which is just a neighboring agency just next to us, but also we got a hit from the Elkhart County Sheriff's Office, which is much further north, as you can see from the map there. Both of those were unknown burglary cases where a unknown suspect entered a residence, stole keys, stole a car. Car was recovered, but and processed for DNA samples were obtained, but the person wasn't in CODIS. So this is just another example of the successes you can have at a local level with these rapid DNA cases. We do have the ability to do familial DNA, which this was an unfortunate case in Terre Haute, Indiana, where three ISU football players were unfortunately killed in a fiery crash. There was not enough left for any kind of visual ID of the body. We were able to take blood swabs from the decedents and swabs from their parents, and within 24 hours, we had every body identified. The bodies could be released. The family could go about their grieving processes and move forward as best they could. To date, the Fishers Police Department has assisted coroner's offices throughout the state and a few out of state. We've ID'd approximately 40 bodies to date, so of unidentified human remains through blood, bone, and other avenues like that. So looking kind of at the future direction, success breeds success. With the success from the rapid DNA, we were able to incorporate additional lab technologies, including MVAC systems, DCS5, which is a digital fingerprint enhancement system, vacuum metal deposition, and we're utilizing all these different technologies together with rapid DNA, and we're having a lot of success. This goes to the open house the chief was talking about on October 1st, which we put that invitation out there for command staff and leadership within forensics. We encourage you to come, spend some time, see how we're implementing some of these tools. And then obviously, in the FBI, I'll talk about it more. The big elephant in the room is CODIS and how those advancements are getting ready to kick off. And I think that they'll have some exciting information that'll really show how that future expansion and direction can help out your rapid DNA program. That's it for my portion of the presentation. My contact information is here. Feel free to reach out if there's anything I can, if I can share any information or answer any questions you have, and I'll pass it back to Lauren at this point.
Thank you, Doug. Our final presenter today is Christine Crouch, and Christine has 22 years of experience in forensic DNA. She is a DNA unit supervisor at the Indiana State Police Laboratory. She has been in the role of State CODIS Administrator since 2006 and also served 2 terms on the NDIS Procedures Board. Her experience with rapid DNA technology includes working with Fishers PD during the establishment of their rapid DNA program, as well as validation of rapid instruments for use in mass fatalities. Christine, over to you.
All right. Are you able to see my slides?
It's just showing a blue slide with nothing on it.
Perfect. Okay. I was asked to join you today to give some thoughts from the laboratory's perspective. And I just want to thank GTH for putting this together and letting me put in the lab's 2 cents. What I hope you've realized listening today is that the phrase rapid DNA can mean so many different things anymore, and each of those uses has its own unique benefits, but also challenges. And we've talked about several of them already, but I just want to briefly run through some of those possibilities again and kind of put in the lab's perspective on things. So the first one is booking stations. As we've said, here in Indiana, that would require a change in legislation. But beyond that change in legislation to address the probable cause issue, the other challenge that we're going to face here is the live scan integration. As CODIS admin, I regularly visit all the jails and that are currently doing arrestee collections for us. And I can tell you the current state of live scan in our state is all over the board. Each county has different levels of keeping them up to date. Some places they're working great, some places they say they hate them and barely ever use them. So we would have to get that under control, and each individual booking site would have to be evaluated and probably updated. And then once that's in place, as we said, the IT infrastructure would have to be established between the booking station and the lab. And from what I've heard from other CODIS admins, that is definitely the hardest part. Then you have regional databases. This is what's currently happening in Fishers and other places around the country. This idea does work, but it's critical to realize that it takes time to build up enough of a database to start getting matches. To give you an example, when I started in the CODIS unit at ISP, we got a hit once every few weeks. Now we average over 50 a month. So you have to put a bunch of stuff into a database to start to have a better chance of 2 samples lining up. I say that so that you're prepared and you can make sure your superiors are prepared to invest a good amount of time and money before you really start to see results from this model. Regional databases also carry some IT secure communication needs. When we were setting it up with Fishers PD, reaching an agreement between all the agencies involved and getting everybody to talk to each other electronically caused some of the biggest delays. If you're going to link into any sort of state system, it's also going to involve the Indiana Office of Technology. So that's a whole other separate agency that has to be on board. ISP actually has an ANDI, and we're part of the state's mass disaster plan, which is headed up by the Department of Homeland Security. So if we're ever needed, we're prepared to go on scene and provide victim DNA identification services. However, we found this is a tricky thing to plan for because there can be so many different variables depending on exactly what happens and where it happens, how many victims there are they whole, are they fragmented, how many test cartridges do we need, what are the conditions at that place, do we have a reliable internet connection so we can link into our own LIMS system back at home, or are we going to be totally out on our own relying on paper? I'll just say we have the instrument, we know how to use it, and beyond that, we're going to have to play it by ear. But like I said, we do have an ANDI at the Indiana State Police Lab. However, we are not using it routinely within the lab at this time. As has been pointed out, rapid instruments, and this is both of them, they were designed for good DNA sources that don't need that individualized treatment and specific attention to get a good result from a particular sample. And we found at the lab that most of the samples we analyze day in and day out are either mixtures or not so good in some other way. They're maybe old or dirty or a teensy tiny amount of DNA. So in a lab that's doing a whole variable type of samples all the time, trying to pick out just the ones that would work well on the rapid ended up kind of being more trouble than it was worth. So it's not a knock on the technology, it's just a different situation when we have a fully capable DNA lab at our disposal. And crime scene in CODIS, this is the ultimate, right? You run it, and we search it in CODIS, potentially much faster than the current process. But as we've said, the standards that will allow this and all the stuff that has to be in place, they're not official yet. They could still change. So this is something, if you're interested, that we would have to work through together when those come out and we see exactly what the requirements are going to be. What we do know for sure is just like we have to do when producing profiles within our lab and putting them in CODIS, we'll have to design a program that ensures compliance by both of us with those new standards. So that's going to require a lot of cooperation and collaboration between the lab and your agency. The other thing I wanted to bring up is there are a couple of ways to use these instruments pretty independently and answer investigative questions quickly. Lieutenant Hawkins gave some great examples of that. As most of you know, at the ISP lab, we have first-tier submission limits. So if you had a really messy crime scene, you could actually run a few stains from around that scene and determine if any of them are different from each other. And that might save you from having your entire first tier that you send to the lab come back as victim DNA. Another possibility would be to run a probative stain from a scene and then run a standard from a person of interest while you're doing an interview with them and see if they match. And that could shape your investigation in those early stages. And then you would just still submit your evidence to our lab like normal for follow-up analysis and entry into CODIS. And while these are pretty straightforward because they avoid some of those IT hassles I keep bringing up, using these tactics effectively is still going to require a good understanding of, number one, how much sample the lab's still going to need on the back end, and what is or isn't likely to work on the rapid, so you don't waste time and cartridges. So hopefully you're really starting to see that the phrase, "we want to do rapid," is a bit more of a complicated statement than it sounds up front. It can give you a DNA profile. It absolutely can, and that's great. But kind of the tricky part we've discovered is that you have to then figure out what you're going to do with that DNA profile. And I know I've been talking a lot about the hurdles that need solved. Please don't see them as reasons you shouldn't do it. I just want you to know what you're getting into. Any use of Rapid is going to be a new program designed from the ground up, and it's going to take a significant amount of time and planning, much more than simply just buying the instrument and plugging it in, which is what we sometimes hear people thought they were going to do. There are policies to be written and MOUs to be signed and validation studies to do and IT coordination. And this is all before you ever run the first real sample. In addition, it's vitally important to understand the price tag of the machine is just the start. I know there are a lot of funding opportunities out there to help you buy instruments, and that's great, but you're going to need a long-term budget and funding source to make this a reality. There's the obvious things like the sample cartridges that you need to run for each sample, but there are also some less obvious recurring costs. There's instrument service agreements, IT maintenance costs. If you're going to go the CODIS route, there'll be fees associated with accreditation. And just depending on what you hope to achieve or the scale of your operation, I could even see remodeling or additional staff. Maybe you and I both need additional staff, and I don't know how things work where you work, but creating new positions at the state level is a pretty big undertaking and doesn't tend to happen overnight. So it's all something to be carefully considered when planning just what type of program is feasible for your agency. Finally, I just want to be clear that neither myself nor ISP wants to discourage the use of this technology at all. I've seen a lot of changes in DNA over the last 20 years, and this is some pretty amazing stuff. And we at the lab are open to working with you and getting these new possibilities figured out. But I do ask that before you just jump in and buy one, please give us a call. We'd be happy to sit down and talk with you about what it is you want to accomplish and help you navigate those options, maybe explain a standard or just create a clearer picture and make a list of all the resources you're going to need. I also want to point out that we at ISP don't know exactly where this is going either. So the sooner you can tell us what you're interested in and what would be helpful to you all, that's going to help us with our planning as well. So we know how many people are interested in what uses and what we're going to need on our end to make that happen. So I just want to invite you to open those lines of communication. This is a whole new world for all of us, so let's figure it out together. This is my direct line. You probably all know other people in our lab system as well. You can feel free to reach out to them. I'm just hoping if there is interest here in Indiana that we can get those conversations going and start figuring out exactly what we're going to need.
Thank you, Christine. And thank you to all of our presenters today. Sheriff Herron's presentation will be recorded later and added to the webinar recording. So you can watch Sheriff Herron's presentation and the entire webinar on www.gorapiddna.com within the next week, and I will put the website in the chat box. So we now have time for a couple questions. We have one for Christine. It says, does the state police laboratory have any timelines in mind on when it could implement the FBI CODA searching plan for rapid DNA? Is there anything local law enforcement could do to assist with implementation?
Absolutely. You can assist by calling us and telling us you're interested. Like I said, we really don't know what to plan for until you guys tell us. If we don't know how many agencies and where are looking to do this and who's serious about it, then we don't know where we need to put our resources either. So I just really encourage you to pick up the phone and get a hold of somebody in the lab so that we can start talking about it. I mean, obviously, timeline wise, we can't do anything until those new QAS standards are out and we have the ability to meet them. So that's going to be just an ongoing conversation and something we'll work on a lot next year, I'm guessing.
Thanks, Christine. Lisa, you could answer this one. My question is about the congressional funding for rapid DNA programs. It was mentioned that 30 or so local law enforcement agencies have been funded by Congress to receive rapid DNA programs. How much money does the average law enforcement agency receive from Congress to rapid DNA programs, and what does the funding cover?
So the average has been around, we think around 600,000 or so. Although I will say that as time goes on with these earmarks, Congress is more and more inclined to fund big projects. So we have certainly in the last few years had a few projects coming in at over $1 million. What does it fund? It funds your instruments. It can fund the consumables. It can fund if you need a reach back agreement with either an accredited lab or whatever other lab you may be working with. If there's a fee involved there, it can cover the validation of the instrument, extra services, extra support, really almost, and then any other supplies that you would need. The only thing it's really not good for, you don't want to use this money for construction. That's actually not allowed. You might be able to renovate a little bit of space if you need, add a lock on a door, things like that, if it needs to be in a secure area, and it probably should be. But so it can pretty much cover everything. It's not good for personnel. It's not good for construction. You could also use it for training and training videos and other training supplies that you might want to have on hand as you're setting a program up.
Hey, Lauren, you're on mute if you're asking another question.
Oh, sorry about that. This is a question for Lieutenant Hawkins. This says, how did you choose the university to provide the reach back service?
Well, when we first started getting into this, we, obviously budgeting becomes an issue, and we're a local law enforcement agency, so we have a limited amount of resources. And I'd worked with Dr. Latham on some bone cases in the past. I just cold called her and asked her, hey, if anybody at the university that might be willing to take this project on, and she was actually interested herself. But it was, honestly, it was dumb luck. I wish I could tell you that it was like a really well thought out plan on my part, but it wasn't. It was just looking at what local resources we had, and where we could try and implement something at a cost savings to the police department. And in exchange for the reach back, we assist the university. We assist Dr. Latham's research graduate students on some research projects, usually once a semester. We'll help them out by running some stuff for them. And they're very good about gearing their projects and their thesis work towards issues that we might be facing in law enforcement. So it's definitely a win-win. We saved a lot of money, and we're able to get some really good experience with the university.
Thanks, Lieutenant. Looks like we have time for maybe 2 more questions. This is one for Monica. We have been told that rapid DNA is not currently a reliable solution for sexual assault kits because of the mixtures. Will rapid DNA become more reliable for sexual assault kits testing in the future?
Hello. So currently it's not a very good idea because it could potentially, because the mixture is not going to be easily interpretable. But we are here at the university trying to come up with a process of maybe running a swab twice. Once with a just the regular process to try and get like the cells that can be lysed first to represent possibly the victim, and then adding another chemical to the swab so that it can be lysed again a second time later on, to get the harder sperm cells. So that way we can try to differentiate between the two and maybe get single sources. Currently, we're not very successful. We're just trying to figure out like ratios and things like that. So who knows? There always is a potential for that because differentials are a great way of trying to separate it, but you always run the risk of having some mixtures.
All right, last question. Guess any of the panelists could answer this one. It says, how easy is it to implement a rapid DNA program? What kind of training is needed and recommended?
I can answer that from a local law enforcement. The training is really is minimal. Like Christine was mentioning, working through MOUs, policies, and procedures. The state lab was very helpful with us on that. It takes time, but it is manageable. You know, getting your administrators or your politicians who hold the finances over initial sticker shocks can sometimes be a little bit of a challenge. But I think um, learning, really evaluating for your individual agency. Again, kind of going back to what Christine said, what is our mission here? What is our objective? And looking at ways to think outside the box with rapid DNA in order to do that. Yeah, you're going to have time with your validation studies. You're going to have time invested in policies and procedures. But that's why we have working groups like this as well, is you can reach out to, we reached out to Ben Salem when we were doing ours, and they gave us their policies and their general orders. And that gave us a great starting point. We had to make a few adjustments to make it applicable for Fisher's PD, but there are a lot of working groups out there that regularly share information like this. We're all on the same team, so you don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel every single time. But yeah, there are some hurdles you're going to have to jump through. But if you have support from your administration and you have people willing to do it, I mean, the actual running of the instrument, if you can make toast at home in your kitchen, you can run a rapid DNA sample. It really is not for as great as the technology is and advanced as the technology is. You're taking a swab, you're putting it in a cartridge, and you're putting it into the instrument, and the instrument's going to give you the result. It doesn't take a lot of specialized training, but you do need quality controls in place, policies and procedures to make sure that you're doing it at a level that is advantageous to your agency, to your investigation.
Thanks, Lieutenant. And that wraps up our webinar for today. Thank you again to all of our presenters and everyone who joined us today. We really hope this information is helpful as you consider the issues related to advancing rapid DNA in your jurisdiction. Please feel free to reach out to GTH DNA or any of the presenters if you have any further questions. We also encourage you to visit www.gorapiddna.com, where you can find additional rapid DNA policy and program information and updates. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.